I was sitting in a coffee shop yesterday, watching a guy at the next table who seemed to have the ultimate productivity setup. He had the noise-canceling headphones, the ergonomic stand, a pristine leather notebook, and a triple-shot espresso.
Ah, the classic setup.
Exactly. For the first 20 minutes, he looked incredibly busy, furiously typing, highlighting things in a planner, and checking his watch with this intense CEO-like focus. You would assume he was crushing his workload.
But I'm guessing that's not what happened.
Not at all. The atmosphere shifted. I noticed he wasn't actually doing the work. He was just planning to do it. He spent an hour perfectly formatting a master to-do list, color-coding every single task.
Oh, I know this guy. I think we've all been this guy.
Right. But the moment he actually opened the document to start the real project, the blank page, he froze. You could physically see the tension enter his shoulders.
The blinking cursor. The enemy.
He stared at that blinking cursor for maybe 10 seconds, and then almost reflexively, he collapsed back into his chair and opened social media. The espresso went cold next to him. It was a perfect, painful example of the paradox of modern laziness. He wasn't unmotivated. He was paralyzed by the weight of his own expectations. He was trying to sprint before he could walk, terrified of making a mistake, looking for a perfection that doesn't exist. It made me realize that what we often call laziness isn't a character flaw. It's usually a biological signal that we are overloaded, fearful, or spiritually hungry. It made me think of how different this frantic hustle looks compared to the quiet, almost rhythmic approach found in Japanese philosophy. And that freezing moment, that paralysis you see when the planner chooses avoidance over action, that's exactly the territory we're going to map out today.
Right.
So the mission for this deep dive is all about navigating that paralyzing modern anxiety and, the crushing weight of perfectionism. We want to move you from that stalled, paralyzed planning state into something that feels like meaningful action.
And to do that, we're not just looking at one system, we're sort of integrating two really powerful worlds.
Exactly. We're taking the practical tools from therapeutic science, things like CBT and ACT.
Cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy.
And we're combining them with the philosophical calm, the resilience you find in Japanese wisdom, specifically concepts like Shoshin and Wabi-Sabi.
I think it's so important to set the stage here, though. We have to be really clear about what we're tackling. Because, people mix up stress and anxiety all the time.
Right. They're not the same thing.
Not at all. The strategies are different. Stress is usually, it's a response to a known thing. A deadline, a tough client, an exam, you worry, you deal with it, and then it goes away.
The stressor is gone, so the feeling subsides.
Exactly. But anxiety is often more pervasive. It's kind of free-floating. Sometimes you don't even know what's triggering it, and it sticks around long after any immediate threat is gone. That causes the real distress we saw in that coffee shop story.
And it's crucial to point out, we're not aiming for a life with zero stress, are we? Because that's not productive either.
No. Absolutely not. In fact, zero stress it's actually bad for performance. This brings us to a really useful psychological idea, the stress curve.
Okay, walk us through that.
So imagine a curve, like an upside-down U. On the far left, you've got too little stress that's under load. Performance is low because you're not engaged. You're just kind of apathetic.
You're bored.
You're bored. As stress increases, you move up towards the peak of that curve. That sweet spot is called optimum stress.
That's where you're in the zone.
That's the zone. Stress is your ally there. It's an energy booster. It motivates you. You're creative. That's the goal.
But the problem with modern life, with the constant notifications and emails, is that everyone's getting pushed right over the top of that peak.
Precisely. You cross that peak and you start sliding down the other side into too much stress or overload, and that's the danger zone.
And what does that look like?
Fatigue, mental exhaustion. You're inefficient. And if you keep pushing, you hit the red zone. That's chronic anxiety, which can spiral into panic, burnout, and just a total breakdown of function.
So the tools we're talking about today are designed to pull you back from that red zone.
Yes, to pull you back, but also to give you ways to stay in that optimal range in the first place. It's about stabilization, not elimination.
Okay, so let's go back to our friend in the coffee shop. The meticulous planning, the freezing. He's living deep in that overload zone. And his planning is actually just a really sophisticated way to procrastinate, isn't it?
It is. Let's unpack the mechanism behind that. We call it the Anxiety-Avoidance-Roller-Coaster.
The Anxiety-Avoidance-Roller-Coaster. I like that.
It's a really useful model because it explains why avoidance feels so good in the moment, but is so destructive in the long run.
So how does it start?
The cycle kicks off when you face something that produces anxiety. Let's use the example of writing the first chapter of a book.
The blank page.
The blank page. Instantly, you feel a spike of worry, agitation, maybe your heart starts racing, and the most powerful human impulse is to make that discomfort go away. So you avoid it.
And avoidance can look like anything, right? Cleaning your desk, checking email.
Or spending an hour color-coding a to-do list. Or, as we saw, just collapsing onto social media.
And the second you do that, you get this huge rush of relief.
Instant relief. The discomfort vanishes. The threat is gone, for now. And that feeling of relief is incredibly reinforcing to your brain.
Ah, so the brain learns a lesson.
It learns a very powerful but very wrong lesson. It learns. Avoidance works. The problem is, because you avoided the task, you never got to test your assumption that it would be a catastrophe.
The prediction that I'm going to fail at this chapter or this is going to be too hard.
Exactly. That negative prediction is maintained. In fact, it gets stronger. So the next time you face that chapter, the initial anxiety spike is even higher, which demands an even bigger act of avoidance. It's a self-feeding downward spiral.
Okay, we can actually visualize this spiral using another model, can't we? The cross-sectional formulation.
Yes, this helps us map how a totally neutral event gets processed internally and then drives those dysfunctional behaviors.
Let's use a classic workplace stressor. The unexpected, vague email from your boss.
Perfect. So the situation is, my boss sent a cryptic email out of the blue asking to meet tomorrow morning. Now we trace how you react across 4 domains.
First up is the physical response.
Right. Your fight or flight system just lights up. Your heart races. Your breathing gets shallow. You get a knot in your stomach. Your body is screaming that something is wrong.
Then comes the cognitive response.
This is the catastrophic story your mind tells you. Thoughts just race. I messed something up. I'm definitely getting fired. I knew I shouldn't have sent that report.
It's all high-stakes interpretation.
Instantaneously. And from that, you get the emotional response.
Yeah.
Intense fear, anxiety, maybe even shame.
And finally, that all leads to the behavioral response.
Which is the action you take to escape those awful internal feelings. It's the avoidance. So maybe you put off replying, or you ask to meet later in the week to stall, or you just call in sick.
And that behavior, that escape, just feeds the roller coaster for next time. Now, let's apply that model back to our perfectionist planner. The situation is, I need to start this big presentation outline.
Right. The physical and emotional responses are that tension and anxiety we talked about.
The cognitive response is the killer. If this outline isn't perfect from the get-go, the whole presentation will fail and I'll look like an idiot.
And the behavioral response isn't calling in sick.
No, it's avoidance that looks like work. Spending an hour formatting the list instead of writing the first bullet point. The fear of not being perfect is the engine driving the whole thing.
That is the core of it. And this behavioral avoidance is basically bankrolled by these rigid thought patterns we call unhelpful thinking styles, or cognitive distortions.
Okay.
These styles lock us into chasing an impossible standard of perfection, which makes any real effort seem totally pointless unless it's flawless from the start.
Let's run through the biggest culprits here, the ones that really paralyze action, starting with the most black and white one.
That would be all or nothing thinking. It's exactly what it sounds like. There's no middle ground.
So if my first draft isn't a masterpiece, it's just garbage.
Complete garbage. If you eat one cookie, your diet for the entire day is ruined. The inner script is basically, if I'm not perfect, I have failed completely.
That's a recipe for paralysis because nothing starts out perfect.
Nothing. So you can't even begin because starting imperfectly is defined as immediate failure.
And that often leads to this heavy internal voice of judgment, the should-must thinking.
Yes, the internal dictator. Using words like should, must, or ought is just so corrosive.
Oh, so?
Well, if you apply it to yourself, I should be further along on this project, it just creates this deep sense of guilt and inadequacy. And if you apply it to others, they should know better. It just leads to constant frustration when people inevitably don't meet your rigid standards.
And when the anxiety really kicks in, our brains stop dealing with reality and start trying to predict the future, which is jumping to conclusions.
And this one has 2 main flavors. The first is mind reading. You're just convinced you know what other people are thinking about you.
And it's never good.
Never. You assume your colleague thinks your idea is dumb because they didn't smile at the right moment. The second flavor is fortune telling. where you predict the absolute worst possible outcome without any evidence.
If I send this email, I'm going to offend the client and we'll lose the whole account.
Exactly. That preemptive failure prediction is a massive driver of just not doing the thing.
And the last one, the one that really dials up the emotional intensity, is magnification or catastrophizing.
Catastrophizing is just blowing things way, way out of proportion. A tiny mistake in a report becomes, I'm going to lose my job, be publicly humiliated, and end up homeless.
Wow.
It's the constant fear of the worst possible thing happening. And we should also mention its opposite, minimization.
What's that?
That's when you shrink any positive thing that happens. You get a compliment, you think, they're just being nice. It ensures you never feel genuinely successful.
Okay, so we've used these psychological tools to map out the rigid, unforgiving architecture of perfectionism. Now we need to pivot. If our mind is demanding perfection, where do we find a soothing alternative?
For that, we turn to Japanese philosophy, specifically the concept of Wabi-Sabi. It is the direct philosophical counterbalance to this paralysis.
Wabi-Sabi.
It's a worldview that encourages us to find beauty and a deep appreciation in the reality of things, which is inherently messy and temporary. Instead of striving for how things should be, we celebrate how they are.
And what's the core idea, the mantra of Wabi-Sabi?
The definition is a perfect mantra for letting go. Nothing lasts, nothing is finished, and nothing is perfect.
I love that.
It's an aesthetic that celebrates things that are imperfect, incomplete, or weathered. It sees cracks, stains, and decay not as failures, but as evidence of a history, of authenticity.
So if we apply that mindset to our own creative work, to that messy first draft, to that difficult project, how does it help us overcome that fear of starting?
It completely reframes failure and effort. Perfectionism sees a messy draft as proof you're incompetent.
Right.
Wabi-Sabi sees it as proof of process. It gives you permission to start badly, to iterate slowly, to have doubtful days. All those things are no longer signs of catastrophic failure. They're just signs of being alive, of being engaged in creation. It just removes that immediate harsh judgment from the whole process.
And the physical embodiment of this, of accepting that breakage, is Kintsugi, right?
Kintsugi, the art of golden repair, is such a powerful metaphor for resilience. When a piece of pottery breaks, you don't throw it away.
Or try to hide the cracks.
Exactly. The technique uses a special lacquer dusted with gold to put the pieces back together. The gold actually highlights the fault lines. It teaches that the story of the breakage and the repair is what makes the object unique, valuable, and even more beautiful.
So our own scars, our professional setbacks, the times we've broken down under pressure, don't diminish our value.
No, they become illuminated. They become part of our history and our strength.
So they go from being sources of shame that we have to hide,
Which just fuels more avoidance.
to being signs of resilience and experience that add depth. If we can apply that kind of grace to our own work, we can overcome the terror of making a mistake, because the mistake itself has the potential to become gold.
Okay, so once we've accepted that imperfection is the starting line, that's Wabi-Sabi, the next step is to cultivate the right attitude to keep moving. And that brings us to Shoshin, the beginner's mind.
Yes. The perfectionist in the coffee shop was trapped by what he already thought he knew about productivity, about what a good plan looks like. To break that cycle, you have to completely reset your starting point.
And Shoshin helps us do that.
It's a foundational concept in Zen Buddhism. The famous quote from Shunryu Suzuki sums it up. In the expert's mind, there are few possibilities. In the beginner's mind, there are many.
So the beginner's mind is empty.
It's empty. It's free of assumptions. It's ready to accept, to doubt, to be open to everything. It's the perfect antidote to the rigid thinking that fuels perfectionism. But why is it so powerful to actively force ourselves to think like a beginner, especially when we spend our whole careers trying to gain expertise?
Because expertise can become a kind of cage. You start to rely on established patterns and past successes, and that can lead to being close-minded, defensive, and afraid to deviate from what you know works.
You get stuck.
You get stuck. Shoshin forces a kind of strategic humility. When you approach a task, even when you've done 1,000 times as a beginner, you naturally start questioning the basic assumptions. You look for new ways to do it. You assume you don't know the best answer yet. And that's critical for innovation.
And we're seeing really successful leaders use this mindset to drive big changes in their organization.
Oh, absolutely. They see its strategic value.
Yeah.
Take Mark Benioff at Salesforce. He says the company's ability to stay innovative is because of their annual Shoshin practice.
What do?
They literally start the year with a blank slate. They ask 5 critical questions to re-examine their entire strategy. It prevents them from getting complacent. They force themselves to ask, if we were starting this company today, what would we do differently?
And the turnaround story at Lego is another great example. It's just Shoshin isn't just for growth, it's sometimes necessary for survival.
Totally. When Jürgen Wig-Knudstorp took over Lego, they were on the verge of bankruptcy. They'd become arrogant, relying on old formulas that just weren't working anymore.
They were too much the expert.
Exactly. He had to create this massive cultural shift where experimentation was valued more than control. He had to get his brilliant, expert staff to let go of that mindset and embrace the humility of a beginner. That's what fueled their legendary comeback.
But embracing this balance between the beginner's mind and the expert's realism sounds incredibly difficult. It means letting go of the control that the perfectionist craves so much.
It requires a lot of courage because the expert frame feels safe. It's predictable. The beginner's mind is messy, it's uncertain, it's full of mistakes. But if you only ever stay in that safe, predictable frame, you just kill any possibility for growth. You have to be willing to fail.
So for anyone listening who wants to actually cultivate this, beyond just being told to be curious, what are the practical steps you can take?
Okay, we can break it down into 5 actionable things. First, encourage continuous learning, and specifically, remove the fear of failure. Actively look for mistakes to learn from.
Okay.
Second, demonstrate humility. Actively seek out feedback, especially from people outside your area of expertise. Third, be ready to embrace and adapt your plans when new information comes in. Don't stick to a plan just because you made it.
Right.
Fourth, foster active listening. Genuinely seek out different perspectives, especially ones that challenge your own. And finally, you have to create a personal culture of experimentation, where even small daily failures are just seen as data points for growth.
So we have the philosophical grounding now with Wabi-Sabi and Shoshin. Let's bridge that way of thinking into concrete action using our CBT toolkit. The goal is to catch that catastrophic thought and pivot to reality.
Exactly. That's the power of cognitive restructuring. When you catch one of those unhelpful thoughts, the normal tendency is to argue with it in your head, which just makes it stronger.
Right.
Instead, we use specific questions to generate an alternative, more functional response that's actually based on reality.
What are some of the best pivot questions to interrupt those catastrophic loops?
The first set of questions challenges the thought's validity. Ask yourself, what's the actual evidence that this thought is 100% true, and what's the evidence against it?
So you're acting like a detective.
Precisely. The second set challenges its usefulness.
Yeah.
What are other more balanced ways of looking at this? And, critically, on a scale of 0 to 100, what is the actual likelihood that my fear will come true? You treat your assumptions like hypotheses, not facts.
And the most practical way to test those hypotheses is to run a behavioral experiment. This isn't just thinking differently, it's acting differently to get new data.
Yes, and this is a highly structured process, and it's absolutely critical for breaking that avoidance cycle. Let's say a listener is terrified of speaking up at a work meeting.
Okay.
Their unhelpful thought, driven by catastrophizing, is, if I ask a question, I'll stumble over my words. Everyone will think I'm an idiot, and I'll be so embarrassed.
A very powerful prediction. They probably believe that 95 out of 100. So how do we turn that into an experiment?
First, you measure the baseline anxiety with something called the SUDS scale subjective units of distress. So the thought of asking a question might be an 80 out of 100.
Right.
Then you design the experiment. Has to be specific. So during the next team meeting, I will prepare one clear, relevant question in advance. I will wait for a pause, and I will ask it.
And the prediction being tested is that they'll stumble and be judged.
Exactly. The alternative prediction is that they'll ask the question, get an answer, and the meeting will just move on. Afterwards, you evaluate the evidence. Did you actually stumble? Did anyone react negatively? Did the world end?
And almost always the result is that the catastrophic prediction was just wildly overblown.
That's right. They find out that, yeah, maybe they were nervous. Maybe the SUDS score dropped from 80 to 40, but they asked the question, the manager answered, and nobody else seemed to even notice. The original prediction's believability drops to maybe a 10.
So the new evidence proves the thought was a distortion, not a fact.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You are systematically dismantling the architecture of avoidance by facing the fear and learning that you can, in fact, cope with it.
This entire process, from analyzing the thought to taking committed action, it's summarized so perfectly in that famous quote about intentional living.
You mean the one from Viktor Frankl?
Yes.
Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. All these techniques we're talking about, CBT, ACT, the philosophies, they're all dedicated to widening that space, to give you that crucial pause you need to choose a purposeful action over a reactive, fear-driven one.
But that space Frankl talks about, it just shrinks to nothing when we're exhausted or hungry or physically out of sorts. You can't choose a valued response if your body is already in panic mode.
No, you can't. And this brings us to the absolutely foundational skills of emotional regulation, which come from therapies like DBT or dialectical behavior therapy. You have to regulate the body to regulate the mind.
And this is where the ABC pre-mnemonic comes in.
It's a holistic checklist for reducing your vulnerability to negative emotions. If your physical baseline is shot, even a tiny stressor can send you into overload.
Let's break down the ABC part first, which is about proactive self-care.
So A is for accumulate positive emotions. This means you have to consciously schedule pleasant activities into your life, not as a reward, but as emotional ballast.
Like scheduling lunch with a friend.
Exactly. B is for build mastery. This is about doing things that make you feel competent and effective. It doesn't have to be huge. It could be learning a new recipe or fixing something that's broken. It fights against helplessness.
And C.
C is for cope ahead of time. This is rehearsing. You mentally walk through a difficult upcoming situation, you anticipate the triggers, and you decide in advance which coping skill you're going to use.
Okay, now for the please section, which is all about our fundamental physical state. I want to spend a minute here because people often don't connect physical health with their ability to do high-level cognitive work.
It's everything. So PL stands for physical illness. This is non-negotiable. Take care of your health. See your doctor. If your body is constantly fighting something, you have no emotional resilience left.
And E is for eating. Why is food so foundational?
Because your food intake directly influences your brain chemistry. Processed foods, sugar spikes, erratic eating. It all leads to emotional volatility. You can't have a regulated mind if your body's chemistry is on a roller coaster.
Okay, A is obviously avoid mood-altering substances. Let's talk about the last two. S for sleep and E for exercise. Sleep is always the first casualty of anxiety.
It is. And quality sleep is foundational. The research is clear. Poor sleep is directly correlated with emotional dysregulation. When you're sleep deprived, the part of your brain that controls rational thought and impulse, the prefrontal cortex, is impaired.
You're running on fumes.
Literally.
Yeah.
And E for exercise is just as crucial. Regular movement is one of the most effective ways to regulate mood and burn off the excess adrenaline that comes with chronic anxiety.
Given how anxiety attacks sleep, let's get really specific on good sleep hygiene that people can start using tonight.
Okay, first, consistency is king. Go to bed and wake up at roughly the same time every day, even on weekends. It stabilizes your body's internal clock.
What's next?
Second, create a sleep ritual. About 15 minutes before bed, do something relaxing. Light stretches, deep breathing. It signals to your nervous system that it's time to wind down.
And what about the glowing rectangles we all stare at right up until the last second?
That's the biggest threat to modern sleep. You need an electronics curfew. No backlit screens for at least 60 minutes before bed. The blue light suppresses melatonin, the sleep hormone.
And any final tips?
Be mindful of caffeine and alcohol a few hours before bed. And a great trick for insomniacs. If you're not asleep after 20 minutes, get up. Go to another room. Do something boring until you feel sleepy again. You have to reassociate your bed with rest, not with struggle.
So once the body is regulated, we can start using these targeted tools like worry time to handle that relentless mental noise. This one always seems so counterintuitive. You're telling people to worry on purpose.
That's the genius of it. Instead of trying to suppress worry, which is impossible.
And just makes it stronger.
Exactly. We contain it. You set aside a specific 20 or 30-minute block each day in a specific worry chair to worry on purpose.
So if a worry pops into my head at 10 a.m., I just write it down and save it for later.
Yes, you acknowledge it, jot it down, and tell your brain, thanks, I'll give this my full undivided attention at 3:30. Then at 3:30, you sit down and you let yourself worry completely. You write it all out in detail.
And what does that repeated exposure do?
It leads to habituation or desensitization. By confronting the same worries over and over in a controlled way, they lose their emotional punch. You also realize that most of the time, the crisis that felt so urgent in the morning has completely lost its power by the afternoon. You're training your brain that worry is manageable, not an emergency.
Now, to use these tools effectively, you have to know what you're up against. You have to identify your specific triggers.
You absolutely have to know what you're reacting to. Triggers can be external, a social event, a crowded place, a specific client, but often the really damaging triggers are internal.
What do you mean by internal trigger?
It could be an emotional state, like a sudden feeling of sadness, or a mental image, or, and this is a big one, a physical sensation.
Like your heart starting to race.
Exactly. A racing heart can trigger the thought, oh no, I'm having a heart attack, which then starts a full-blown panic attack.
Yeah.
The critical insight here is that sometimes the symptoms themselves become the trigger for the next cycle of anxiety.
Once we've identified all the things we're avoiding, we can build a structured path forward with the avoidance hierarchy.
Yes, this is the step-by-step approach to exposure therapy. It's built on the simple principle that the only way out of avoidance is through it. You create a ladder of all the situations you avoid.
How does that work?
At the very top, you put the thing that gives you the most anxiety, say, giving a huge keynote speech. That's 100. At the very bottom, you put the easiest thing you avoid, maybe replying to a simple email you've been putting off. That's a 10.
And we use that SUDS scale again to rate everything.
Yes, the subjective units of distress scale is your guide. You must start at the bottom of the ladder. You approach that easiest situation, and you stay with it until your SUDS score drops down to a 20 or 30. Once that item loses its power, you move up one rung.
So it's a gradual process.
It's a systematic, gradual process. And it affirms the most crucial message of all. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to take action while fear is screaming in your ear. It's how you overcome that paralysis, one small, manageable step at a time.
So moving from these very structured skills, let's circle back to how Eastern philosophies offer these complementary tools. With the modern epidemic of burnout, the Japanese concept of Shinrin-yoku seems especially relevant right now.
Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing. And it's much more than just a walk in the woods. It's an intentional, mindful practice of immersing your senses in a natural environment.
So it's about shutting down that planning mind.
Completely. And just attending to the sensory input, the sounds, the smells, the feeling of the air.
And there are established, measurable benefits to this.
Oh, absolutely. The physiological benefits are well documented. We see significant decreases in blood pressure, lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol. Psychologically, it helps with negative moods, especially for people with depressive tendencies.
And I heard something about the immune system.
Yes, this is fascinating. Research has shown it enhances the function of our natural killer cells, the ones critical for fighting cancer and boosting immunity. And that effect can last for up to 30 days after a session.
Okay, so with those powerful effects on stress, researchers naturally wanted to test it against the big one, chronic professional burnout, especially among doctors. And this is where the results get really interesting and force us to make a distinction between acute stress and systemic exhaustion.
Right. This specific study took a group of physicians and residence people known for high chronic burnout and had them do a single 3-hour guided Shinrin-yoku walk. They used standardized burnout tests to measure the objective changes.
And what was the objective result?
The clear finding was that the single 3-hour session did not result in a statistically significant lasting change in their chronic burnout scores. The burnout was still there.
But the subjective data, what the doctors actually said about the experience, told a completely different story.
Completely. The subjective findings were overwhelmingly positive. Almost every single participant reported feeling less stressed, more at peace, calmer, and just. A profound sense of well-being during and right after the walk. The relief was real and powerful.
So how do we square that? How can you feel acute relief but still have chronic burnout? What does that tell us about tackling these big systemic problems?
The key insight is that burnout isn't just stress. It's a chronic syndrome that results from systemic issues. Bureaucracy, unsustainable workloads, moral injury. It builds up over a long time. A single session of anything, forest bathing, yoga, one therapy session, is great for acute stress relief. But it's structurally incapable of fixing a deep systemic condition.
And there was a participant quote that just perfectly captures that tension.
It's so telling. The quote is, "I felt very relaxed after forest therapy. Then I came home and did 6 hours of work that needed to be done before Monday." Forest therapy didn't take those things away. It highlights the difference perfectly. Shinrin-yoku provided a temporary sanctuary, which is valuable. But the source of the exhaustion, the system itself, remained untouched. Relief is not a solution to chronic overload.
And that knowledge, the fact that our negative feelings and external pressures won't just magically disappear, leads us directly into our final framework, acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. which shifts the focus from getting rid of symptoms to living a valued life, even with discomfort.
Exactly. The goal of ACT is to achieve psychological flexibility. That's the ability to be fully present with all your uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, and then still take action guided by your values.
Being present, open, and doing what matters.
That's the mantra. ACT has 6 core processes, but let's focus first on cognitive diffusion, which is all about dealing with those unhelpful thoughts we talked about earlier.
Diffusion, it sounds like separating yourself from the thought. How do you do that?
It's about noticing your thoughts without letting them hook you. You treat them not as truth, but as mental noise just passing through. A really powerful technique is the broken record method.
Okay.
If you're hooked by the thought, I am a failure, you just repeat the word failure over and over and over again quickly until it just becomes a meaningless sound. It loses its emotional grip.
That's interesting. It just drains the word of its power. What are some other ways to frame thoughts as just mental events?
You can use observational language. Instead of, I'm an incompetent procrastinator, you say, I'm having the thought that I'm an incompetent procrastinator.
It creates distance.
It creates distance.
Yeah.
Or you can even be playful and silently thank your mind. Thanks, mind, for that thought. You can also use metaphors like seeing your thoughts as leaves floating down a stream or clouds passing in the sky. You just watch them go by. You don't have to jump on them.
This whole shift is really about stopping the internal war, isn't it? Which ACT illustrates with the drop the rope metaphor.
The drop the rope metaphor is so central to understanding acceptance. Imagine you're at the edge of a deep pit, playing tug-of-war with a giant monster.
Yeah.
That monster is all your painful internal stuff. Anxiety, shame, self-doubt. You pull and you struggle with all your might. But every time you pull, the monster just pulls back harder, keeping you locked in the struggle, stuck at the edge of the pit.
So what's the strategy?
Stop fighting. Stop the struggle. You realize the only way to win is to simply drop the rope. The monster is still there, the feelings are still there, but you're not locked in a battle with them anymore. You're now free to walk away and use your energy for things that actually matter.
So if we drop the rope, what drives our actions? That brings us to the choice point model, moving from suffering to a meaningful life.
The choice point is all about being intentional. When a situation triggers those painful thoughts and feelings, you're at a decision point. You can make away moves.
Which are behaviors to escape the discomfort. Procrastination, fighting feelings, excessive planning.
Like the man in the coffee shop. Those away moves always lead to more suffering in the long run.
Or you can choose the other path.
Or you could choose towards moves. These are actions that are aligned with your core values. They are the steps you take even when you're uncomfortable that lead you toward a rich, meaningful life. Which of course brings up the question of what your values actually are.
And we need to be really clear about the difference between values and goals. People mix them up all the time.
They do. A goal is something you achieve and cross off a list, like getting a promotion or finishing a degree. A value is a direction. It's a quality of action that's always ongoing.
Like courage or curiosity.
Exactly. You never finish being courageous. You just keep moving in the direction of courage.
And the Problems and Values worksheet helps people articulate this.
It does. It has you explicitly contrast what you're doing now, all the stuff that creates struggle and suffering, against the values and goals that would define a rich and meaningful life for you. You ask, if I stop fighting my anxiety, what do I want to move toward?
And that movement is what ACT calls committed action.
Yes, taking committed action guided by your values. And by continually choosing those valued actions, even when it's hard, you develop what's called emotional agility.
So what does that look like?
It's really the culmination of all these skills. First, you show up to your emotions with curiosity. Second, you step out. That's diffusion, observing your thoughts. Third, you walk your why, connecting your actions to your core values. And finally, you move on, taking small, committed steps in that value direction. The whole power of ACT is in its most challenging belief. Discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. You don't have to wait to feel ready or calm or perfect to start living.
Wow. What a profound synthesis. We started with that image of modern paralysis,
Yeah.
the perfectionist frozen by his own impossible standards. And we found that the way out requires this really radical integration of psychology and philosophy.
It really does. It's about shifting from trying to control and perfect everything, which is what fuels the anxiety, and moving toward intentional acceptance and flexible value-driven action.
It's about changing our whole relationship with discomfort. We use the Japanese philosophies, embracing the imperfection of Wabi-Sabi, adopting the curiosity of Shoshin to set the philosophical stage.
And that grounding then allows us to deploy these highly structured psychological skills.
Right. Whether it's using CBT's behavioral experiments to test reality, or DBT's skills to fortify our physical resilience, or actively using ACT's diffusion and acceptance to drop that internal rope.
The ultimate mission is always the same. It's to ensure that even when fear and uncertainty are present, your actions are still dictated by your deepest values.
It's choosing to live a meaningful life despite all the noise.
It's the daily choice, prioritizing action over analysis, process over perfection, and courage over comfort.
And that leaves us with the final reflective thought for today from the poet Mary Oliver. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?